Have you ever walked away from a conversation and suddenly thought, that didn't feel like me? You laughed at the right moments. You said the right things. You acted normal, friendly, professional. And yet, the second you were alone, a strange thought appeared. Why did that feel fake? Maybe it happens at work. You speak in meetings, nod along, smile, say what makes sense, but it feels like you're playing a role. Maybe it happens with friends. You joke, you listen, you engage, but a part of you feels slightly detached, like you're watching yourself perform. Maybe it happens in relationships. You say, "I love you." You show up. You do everything right. But deep down, there's a quiet voice asking, "Why does this feel like I'm acting?" So you start wondering what's wrong with you. You wonder if everyone secretly feels this way. You wonder if you're just overthinking. You wonder if one day someone will notice and realize you're not who they think you are. You start asking yourself questions you don't know how to answer. Do I actually know who I am? Why do I feel different around everyone? Why does everything feel slightly forced? If this feels familiar, you're not broken. You're not fake. You're not pretending on purpose. You're following a pattern. And once you understand where that pattern comes from, this feeling starts to make sense. The feeling of pretending rarely shows up in dramatic moments. It shows up in ordinary, everyday life. Small conversations. Casual interactions. Routine situations. Nothing is visibly wrong, and yet something feels slightly off. You might notice it when someone asks a simple question like, "How are you?" You answer automatically. Good. Busy. Same as always. The conversation continues, but a part of you knows the answer was incomplete. Not a lie, but not fully true either. Just the version of the truth that feels easiest to say. This happens dozens of times a week. Small edits. Small adjustments. Small performances. You might notice it at work when you switch into professional mode the moment you open your laptop. Your tone changes. Your posture changes. The way you write emails changes. You sound confident. Clear. Polished. But when the meeting ends and the screen goes dark, you feel a quiet drop in energy. Like stepping off a stage after a performance. You might notice it with friends when conversations stay on the surface. You laugh. You tell stories. You ask questions. You participate. But deep conversations feel harder than they seem for everyone else. You hesitate before sharing real thoughts. You filter what you say. You test sentences in your head before speaking them out loud. You might notice it in social gatherings. Everyone seems relaxed, natural, comfortable. You observe how people talk, how they react, how they tell stories. You adapt your behavior subtly to match the tone of the room. You adjust your humor. Adjust your opinions. Adjust your energy. And afterward, when you are alone again, the same thought returns. Why did that feel like acting? This feeling is confusing because nothing obviously fake happened. You were polite. Friendly. Appropriate. You did everything right. No one would accuse you of being dishonest. No one would say you were pretending. Yet internally, the experience feels performative. This creates a strange emotional gap between how others see you and how you experience yourself. People may describe you as confident, social, easy to talk to. They may assume you feel comfortable in situations that secretly drain you. And because others don't see the internal effort, you start questioning your own experience. You wonder if you are being dramatic. You wonder if this is just normal social behavior. You wonder if everyone feels this way and simply doesn't talk about it. But there is a difference between adapting socially and feeling like you are constantly performing. Social adaptation is flexible. You can be professional at work and relaxed at home without losing your sense of self. Performance feels different. Performance feels like constant monitoring. Constant adjusting. Constant awareness of how you are being perceived. You might notice how much mental energy goes into simple interactions. Thinking before speaking. Rehearsing responses. Replaying conversations afterward. Wondering if you sounded strange. Wondering if you said too much. Wondering if you said the wrong thing. After social events, instead of feeling energized, you feel mentally tired. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally drained. Like you spent hours carefully managing how you appeared. This exhaustion often leads to a desire for solitude. Being alone feels easier. Not because you dislike people, but because you do not have to perform. You do not have to monitor yourself. You do not have to think about how you are coming across. Alone, the pressure disappears. And this contrast becomes very noticeable. Social interaction feels like effort. Being alone feels like relief. You might start preferring quiet evenings over social gatherings. Canceling plans feels comforting. Staying home feels safe. Solitude becomes a place where you can stop performing. But this creates another layer of confusion. Because you still want connection. You still want relationships. You still want closeness. You enjoy people. You enjoy conversations. Yet at the same time, they feel exhausting. This contradiction is difficult to explain to others. You want connection, but connection feels draining. You want closeness, but closeness feels effortful. Over time, this can lead to a deeper question. If social situations feel like performance, who am I when I am not performing? This question can feel unsettling. Because when you spend years adapting to different environments, it becomes harder to identify what feels natural. You may notice that you behave slightly differently with different people. More serious with some. More playful with others. More reserved in certain settings. More expressive in others. This flexibility is normal to some degree. Everyone adjusts to context. But when the adjustments feel constant, you may start wondering if there is a real version of you underneath all of them. You might even start asking yourself questions like, what is my real personality? What do I actually like? What do I actually think? And the answers may feel unclear. This uncertainty can create a quiet sense of disconnection from yourself. Like you know how to be many versions of yourself, but you are not sure which one feels most real. And once this question appears, it rarely goes away. Because the feeling of pretending is not random. It is part of a deeper emotional pattern. A pattern that began long before you noticed it. And to understand it, we need to go further back. The feeling of pretending did not begin in adulthood. It did not appear randomly one day during a meeting or a conversation with friends. Like most emotional patterns, it started much earlier, in environments where adapting was more important than expressing. As children, we begin life with a very simple emotional instinct. We express what we feel. We react honestly. We cry when we are upset. We laugh when we are happy. We ask questions when we are curious. We show preferences clearly. We say no when something feels wrong. We say yes when something feels exciting. Authenticity is the default state of childhood. But children are also wired for something even more powerful than authenticity. They are wired for connection. Connection with caregivers is survival. It is safety. It is emotional regulation. It is the foundation of the nervous system. And when authenticity and connection feel misaligned, connection always wins. This is where adaptation begins. Imagine a child in a family where emotions are not openly discussed. Not because the family is harmful or uncaring, but because emotions feel uncomfortable, inconvenient, or overwhelming to the adults in the environment. Maybe feelings are brushed off with phrases like, "You're fine," or "Don't worry about it." Maybe difficult conversations are avoided. Maybe vulnerability feels unfamiliar. The child quickly learns the emotional atmosphere of the home. They learn what emotions feel welcome and which ones feel disruptive. They learn what gets attention and what creates tension. This learning does not happen consciously. It happens through repetition. A child expresses frustration and sees discomfort in the parent's face. A child cries and hears, "It's not a big deal." A child shares excitement and receives a distracted response. A child expresses fear and is told to be brave. None of these moments are dramatic. None of them are intentionally harmful. But together, they create a pattern. The child begins to understand something subtle. Not all emotions are equally accepted. So the child adapts. They start filtering emotional expression. They start choosing what to show and what to hide. They start adjusting reactions based on how others respond. This is the beginning of emotional performance. Children are incredibly skilled observers. They notice tone, facial expressions, silence, body language. They learn how to read the emotional climate of a room long before they understand language fully. And once they learn how to read the room, they begin learning how to match the room. They become quieter when things feel tense, more cheerful when things feel heavy, more agreeable when conflict appears, more helpful when stress is present. They are not pretending. They are adapting. And adaptation works. It reduces tension. It maintains connection. It creates harmony. So the nervous system learns an important lesson. Adjusting yourself keeps relationships stable. Over time, this adjustment becomes automatic. A child who learns to adapt emotionally often becomes the easy child. The one who does not cause trouble. The one who is mature for their age. The one who is praised for being calm, responsible, and understanding. Adults admire this maturity. Teachers praise this behavior. Family members rely on this stability. And the child feels proud. Proud to be easy. Proud to be mature. Proud to be someone who does not create problems. But underneath that pride, an emotional shift is happening. The child begins to associate authenticity with risk. Because authenticity sometimes creates tension. Authentic emotions sometimes disrupt harmony. Authentic needs sometimes inconvenience others. So authenticity becomes filtered. Not eliminated, but edited. Over time, the child becomes highly skilled at presenting the version of themselves that fits each environment. At school, they behave one way. At home, another. With friends, another. With authority figures, another. Each version is real, but incomplete. Instead of expressing one consistent sense of self, the child learns to present different versions of themselves depending on the situation. This flexibility is adaptive in childhood. It helps navigate complex social environments. It helps maintain connection. But adaptation, repeated over years, becomes identity. By adolescence, this pattern becomes more noticeable internally. The teenager may begin feeling slightly different from peers. Slightly disconnected from their own reactions. Slightly unsure of what feels natural versus what feels expected. They may notice how much they think before speaking. How much they monitor their behavior. How much they analyze social interactions afterward. They may feel comfortable socially, yet strangely disconnected internally. This is the early experience of emotional self-monitoring. Instead of simply being present in interactions, part of the mind is always observing. Always adjusting. Always evaluating. Am I saying the right thing? Am I reacting correctly? Do I sound normal? Did that seem strange? This internal observer becomes a constant companion. And because the behavior appears socially successful, the pattern is reinforced. The teenager may be seen as polite, kind, thoughtful, and mature. They may perform well academically. They may maintain friendships. From the outside, everything looks stable. But internally, a quiet question begins to grow. Why does everything feel effortful? This effort continues into adulthood, where adaptation becomes second nature. The ability to adjust becomes automatic. The ability to read social cues becomes highly refined. And yet, the original skill of expressing authenticity without filtering has not been practiced in the same way. This is why adulthood can bring a strange realization. You know how to behave in many environments, but you are not entirely sure what feels natural when you stop adjusting. And that is where the feeling of pretending truly begins to take shape. By adulthood, the habit of adapting becomes so natural that you rarely question it. You move through different environments switching versions of yourself automatically. At work you are professional and composed. With friends you are relaxed and humorous. With family you are familiar and accommodating. In relationships you are attentive and supportive. None of these versions are fake, but none of them feel fully complete either. Instead of feeling like different sides of the same person, they can feel like different roles. And when life becomes busy and full, you spend more and more time moving between roles without pausing long enough to ask what feels natural underneath them. This often becomes most noticeable in environments where expectations feel high. Work is one of the strongest examples. In professional settings there are clear social rules. Be competent. Be confident. Be agreeable. Be productive. These expectations are not unreasonable, but for someone who already learned to adapt early, the workplace becomes a stage where the performance feels constant. You prepare before meetings. You rehearse what you will say. You carefully choose words in emails. You double-check tone. You think about how your ideas will sound. You imagine how others will react. And when the interaction is over, you replay it in your mind. Did I sound confident enough? Did I say too much? Did that come across wrong? The mental energy spent monitoring yourself often goes unnoticed because it feels normal. But it creates a subtle emotional fatigue. At the end of the day, you may feel drained without understanding why. You were not physically active. You were not in danger. You were simply interacting. Yet your mind feels tired. This same pattern appears in social life. Before meeting friends, you think about what mood you are in and whether it matches the group. During conversations, you track reactions. You adjust tone. You shape stories to fit the moment. You laugh when laughter feels expected. You stay quiet when silence feels safer. Again, nothing here is dishonest. It is social awareness. But the level of monitoring makes the interaction feel like effort instead of spontaneity. After social events, the mental replay begins. You remember specific moments. You analyze specific sentences. You wonder how others interpreted what you said. You imagine alternative responses you could have given. This mental review can last long after the event ends. This pattern becomes even more intense in close relationships. Romantic relationships bring emotional closeness, vulnerability, and the desire to be truly known. But for someone used to adapting, being fully known can feel unfamiliar. You may share thoughts and feelings, but only after filtering them. You may express needs, but only after minimizing them. You may communicate concerns, but only after softening the message. You learn to say things gently, indirectly, carefully. You avoid conflict when possible. You prioritize harmony. You try to be understanding. You try to be supportive. These are valuable qualities, but when they become constant, they can create emotional distance. Instead of showing raw emotions, you show processed emotions. Instead of expressing reactions immediately, you analyze them first. Instead of sharing uncertainty, you present clarity. And slowly, the relationship becomes a place where you are close, but not fully visible. You are present, but still monitoring yourself. This creates a quiet fear. If people truly knew how much effort this takes, would they see you differently? If people saw how much you think before speaking, would they think you are strange? If people saw the uncertainty behind your confidence, would they trust you less? This fear fuels the performance. The performance fuels the exhaustion. And the exhaustion fuels the desire for solitude. Being alone becomes the only environment where the performance stops. Where the monitoring quiets. Where the mental observer relaxes. This is why solitude feels both comforting and confusing. It feels peaceful, but it also raises a difficult question. If I feel most relaxed when I am alone, what does that mean about my relationships? This question can feel unsettling. Because you value connection. You enjoy people. You want closeness. Yet the effort involved in social interaction can make connection feel draining instead of energizing. Over time, this creates a deeper layer of self-questioning. You may start wondering whether your personality is real or constructed. Whether your preferences are genuine or adapted. Whether the version of you that others know is truly you. This uncertainty can create a sense of emotional distance from yourself. Like you are watching your life from slightly outside instead of fully inside it. And once this feeling appears, it becomes difficult to ignore. As this pattern deepens, something important happens internally. The question stops being only about social situations or relationships. It becomes a question about identity itself. You begin to wonder not just why do I feel like I'm pretending, but who am I when I stop pretending? This is where emotional suppression quietly enters the picture. When a person learns early that adapting keeps connection safe, the nervous system develops a strong internal filter. Emotions are not ignored, but they are delayed, softened, or redirected. Reactions are evaluated before they are expressed. Feelings are checked against the environment before they are allowed to surface. Over time, this filtering becomes automatic. You no longer notice the moment where you pause before reacting. It happens so fast that it feels like your natural response. But internally, there is always a slight distance between what you feel and what you show. This distance is not emptiness. It is containment. Emotional suppression is not the absence of emotion. It is the holding of emotion inside the body without release. And when emotions are held for long periods, they change form. Sadness becomes numbness. Anger becomes irritation or fatigue. Fear becomes constant tension. Joy becomes muted or brief. This is why people who feel like they are pretending often describe feeling disconnected, flat, or slightly unreal. Not because they feel nothing, but because they have learned not to fully feel outwardly. The nervous system becomes very good at staying within an acceptable emotional range. You do not react too strongly. You do not express too much. You do not disrupt the emotional balance of the room. And because this control feels responsible and mature, it is rarely questioned. Another layer of this pattern is the development of a strong internal observer. This observer watches your thoughts, your tone, your body language, your facial expressions. It evaluates how you are coming across in real time. Am I being too much? Am I being awkward? Am I being boring? Am I being inappropriate? This observer is not cruel. It is protective. It developed to help you stay socially safe. But when the observer never turns off, it prevents full presence. Part of you is always watching yourself instead of simply being yourself. This creates a split inside. One part of you experiences life. Another part of you monitors that experience. Over time, this split can lead to a sense of unreality. You may feel like you are slightly outside your own life. Like you are watching yourself interact instead of fully inhabiting the moment. This experience is subtle, but powerful. It can make joy feel distant. It can make intimacy feel effortful. It can make spontaneity feel risky. Because spontaneity means letting go of control. And control has become the way you stay emotionally safe. Another important piece of this pattern is how emotions are judged internally. When you grow up adapting, you often internalize the idea that emotions should be reasonable, appropriate, and manageable. You may unconsciously believe that strong emotions are immature. That expressing needs is risky. That vulnerability must be controlled. So when emotions arise, you analyze them instead of feeling them. You intellectualize instead of expressing. You explain instead of experiencing. This can make you very insightful, reflective, and self-aware. But it can also create distance from your own emotional body. You may understand why you feel something without actually feeling it fully. You may know where a pattern comes from without experiencing emotional release. This is why understanding alone does not resolve the feeling of pretending. Because the issue is not lack of insight. It is lack of emotional permission. Permission to feel without filtering. Permission to react without evaluating. Permission to exist without monitoring. Another consequence of long-term emotional suppression is difficulty identifying personal desires. When you spend years adjusting to others, your own preferences can become unclear. You may struggle to answer questions like what do I want, what do I enjoy, what feels right for me. Not because you have no preferences, but because your attention has been trained outward instead of inward. You learn to ask what is expected, what is appropriate, what will keep things smooth. Over time, those questions replaced the question of what feels true. This can create a sense of drifting. You may achieve things. Maintain relationships. Function well. Yet still feel disconnected from a sense of inner direction. And when identity feels unclear, performance fills the gap. You rely on roles. On expectations. On external markers of success or belonging. But roles are not identities. They are containers. And living inside containers that do not fully fit creates tension. This is why the feeling of pretending often intensifies during periods of change. New jobs. New relationships. Life transitions. These moments disrupt familiar roles and force you to confront the question of who you are without them. And without a clear internal reference, the performance becomes more noticeable. The good news is that this pattern, like all learned patterns, is not permanent. But before it can shift, it has to be seen clearly. Because the feeling of pretending is not a flaw. It is a sign of a nervous system that learned to prioritize safety through adaptation. An understanding that opens the door to something new. When you begin to understand this pattern, something important shifts. For a long time, the feeling of pretending may have felt confusing, frustrating, or even shameful. You may have wondered why social situations feel effortful, why solitude feels relieving, or why connection sometimes feels draining instead of energizing. But seeing the pattern changes the story. Because the feeling of pretending is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that your nervous system learned to adapt in order to stay connected and safe. There was a time when adjusting yourself helped you navigate relationships. It helped you maintain harmony. It helped you avoid conflict or emotional tension. It helped you feel accepted in environments where authenticity felt uncertain. That adaptation was not weakness. It was intelligence. It was protection. It was survival. The problem is not that the strategy existed. The problem is that the strategy never received an update. The nervous system still behaves as if emotional safety depends on careful self-monitoring. As if every interaction requires evaluation. As if authenticity must be filtered before it is expressed. But adulthood offers something childhood could not always guarantee. The possibility of relationships built on mutual authenticity instead of constant adaptation. This does not mean authenticity suddenly feels easy. Letting go of emotional monitoring can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. The internal observer may still appear. The urge to filter may still arise. The instinct to adjust may still feel automatic. Change begins slowly, in small moments of allowing yourself to exist without correction. It may begin with expressing a thought without rehearsing it first. Sharing a feeling without minimizing it. Allowing silence in conversation without rushing to fill it. Letting a reaction exist without immediately analyzing it. These moments may feel subtle, but they represent a new experience for the nervous system. The experience of being present instead of performing. Over time, these small moments accumulate. The gap between internal experience and external expression begins to narrow. The observer becomes quieter. The need to monitor softens. And with that softening comes a new feeling. Relief. Relief from constant self-evaluation. Relief from constant adjustment. Relief from the quiet pressure to always present the right version of yourself. This relief often arrives gradually. You may notice conversations feel slightly easier. Social interactions feel slightly less draining. Silence feels less uncomfortable. Authentic reactions feel less risky. You may begin to feel more grounded in your own preferences, opinions, and emotional responses. Instead of asking what is expected, you begin asking what feels true. This shift does not remove your ability to adapt. Adaptation remains a valuable skill. The difference is that adaptation becomes a choice instead of a constant requirement. You can still be professional at work, thoughtful with friends, and supportive in relationships. But you no longer feel the need to monitor every detail of how you appear. You begin to trust that connection does not require constant performance. That relationships can survive moments of awkwardness. That authenticity does not automatically create rejection. And this trust changes how connection feels. Instead of feeling like effort, connection begins to feel like presence. Instead of feeling like performance, interaction begins to feel like participation. You may still enjoy solitude. You may still value quiet time. But solitude becomes rest instead of escape. A place to recharge instead of a place to recover from performance. And perhaps the most important change is the relationship you develop with yourself. The question shifts from who am I supposed to be to who do I feel like being? That question does not require an immediate answer. It simply opens space for curiosity. Because identity is not something you perform. It is something you experience gradually, through small moments of authenticity. And the part of you that learned to adapt does not disappear. It simply steps back, allowing the rest of you to step forward.